I'm a little worried that your internal microbiome, so they can eat you. They can be eating the lining of your gut when they're not getting enough fiber. There are some health professionals I've met that were headed to med school, maybe. And before going to medical school, somewhere along the way, they got convinced that maybe nutrition was farther upstream. And in medicine, they're treating people after they're sick and they're treating symptoms, but what was the cause? So the cause can often be a poor diet. And so I think for a turning point for some people, it's recognizing that. I think for other people that at least, so for me, this is what I see among Stanford students who are taking courses and they're 18 to 20 years old and they're trying to think what they want to do for life. And it seems like they took food for granted and it's just something that you eat. But then somewhere along the way, they realize how many different things that you can do with nutrition. So for example, I think the traditional approach many, many years ago was you would be a dietitian in a hospital. And that seemed to be the main thing that a nutritionist would do. But then it became clear that the sports community was interested in that. And so you could be a nutritionist for athletes and try to help them increase their performance. And then it also became clear that there were so many people in the US, despite the high standard of living, there's an incredible number of people who suffer from nutrition insecurity, like they don't have enough access to food. And there are a number of public health organizations that try to increase the access and availability of healthy food. And so you might work for a food bank, or you might work for a soup kitchen, or some other NGO, some non-governmental organization that was helping needy people. There are government positions where you could work in policy at the nutrition level. So many different policies. For example, again, going back to nutrition security, safety net programs for SNAP. So that's the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. WIC, that's Women, Infants, and Children. We also have school lunch and school breakfast programs. I'm currently on the Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee that every 5 years reviews the dietary guidelines for Americans. And I am stunned how many nutrition scientists they have working for the government to help update these guidelines with many different backgrounds. Some it's a traditional nutrition background, some it's a statistical background, some it's more of a public health background, some it's more epidemiology. And so I think asking about the turning point is interesting to me because I think many people thought that nutrition was simple and it was food, but you actually really need a chemistry background and a biology background and a physiology background. And that for many people, that nutrition is an exciting way to apply that to humans. And so it can lead to, I think, a number of very exciting careers. All that cluster: metabolic syndrome, prediabetes, fatty liver disease. So interestingly, one of the first scientists to really address that came from Stanford, and his name was Gerald Reaven, and he died recently. He lived a very productive life. I think he was in his early 90s, and he still had many NIH grants that he was running. He just couldn't stop studying. And he originally called it Syndrome X. This is, I'm going to probably oversimplify the story. But if you go back in time, let's take cardiovascular disease and diabetes and the overlap a bit there. So quite a bit of emphasis was on blood cholesterol level. And then it was on LDL cholesterol level in particular, not just total cholesterol, because it appeared that maybe the HDL cholesterol was healthy and good for you and the LDL cholesterol was bad for you. Sometimes somebody with a high total cholesterol actually had a high HDL and a low LDL. And so don't be as worried about that. But drugs were developed to lower LDL cholesterol. And so the statin type drugs, the HMG-CoA reductase inhibitors have been out for many, many years. And quite a few cardiologists and statins and physicians think statins maybe should be in the drinking water. It's so effective. Everyone should take a statin. I don't agree with that, but there is widespread enthusiasm for statins for lowering LDL cholesterol. And a number of studies were done, and in general, they were very effective. What's interesting is that Jerry Reven from Stanford noticed that there was a group that had low LDL cholesterol that did have heart disease and diabetes. And instead of a high LDL cholesterol, they had low LDL cholesterol, but they had high triglycerides, and they tended to have prediabetes or diabetes, and they had high blood pressure. And physically, they tended to have a central adiposity, which meant that the excess fat that they had in their body wasn't distributed all around the body. It was mostly in their organ region or in their belly. And as he saw this cluster of symptoms, despite a low LDL, as he kept studying this and studying this, he realized that a lot of these people had an issue with glucose control and insulin. He actually invented a way to look at this called the steady state plasma glucose. It was a very intensive metabolic test where he would infuse in both arms a line, and you had to stay around for this test for 8 hours. And he would provide a drug called somatostatin that would shut down your own production of insulin. So your pancreas wouldn't make insulin when you had this. And he would infuse exogenous insulin or insulin from outside your body in one arm and glucose in the other. And he would control the amount of glucose, and he would see how much insulin it took to maintain your glucose at a healthy level. And he saw for different people, it was a very different level. And so for some people, the insulin level was very high to put away the same amount of glucose. And so what he discovered in this was, this tended to be in folks with type 2 diabetes or prediabetes, or something that eventually came to be called metabolic syndrome. His understanding that he helped develop was the pancreas was producing insulin, which should be putting glucose away, but it wasn't working. The glucose stayed high. And the message that came to the body was, oh, maybe I need to produce more insulin. Oh, it's still not being put away. More insulin. It's still in the blood. More insulin. And eventually, the glucose would be put away in the body and we'd get it out of your blood system. But that's what he called insulin resistant. It's like you're making it, it's in the bloodstream, but your body isn't listening to the message. The message should have been, oh, body makes insulin when you've had a meal and when you have glucose, so that you can go to the cells, open up the gates to let the glucose in, and it wasn't working. So it was like not hearing the message that the insulin was intended to be giving. And so it appeared that this was a cluster of things that went together. Again, not high LDL. These are people that a cardiologist would say, oh, you look fine, your LDL's low. But a lot of them were getting diabetes, and a lot of those with diabetes were having heart attacks. And so it was this, again, it was originally called something like Syndrome X, and it had a bunch of names. Eventually, a lot of people started calling it this metabolic syndrome, this cluster of 5 things. The characterization of this was, as long as you had any 3 of the 5, you had metabolic syndrome. Different people or countries even had a different set of 5, but it was almost always triglyceride and HDL and blood pressure and some measure of insulin or glucose and some measure of obesity or central adiposity. Jerry Reven actually hated this term, I remember long ago, because if one group of people had these 3 but not these 2, and another group had these 3 and not these 2, they both got characterized as having metabolic syndrome. And he thought, I'm not sure if that's right. They might be different people because they don't all have the same pattern. But I think over time, what happened was people recognized, yes, if you only have these three instead of these three, you might be different, but this all seems to be related to an underlying insulin resistance. There is a term for people who are obese or have excess adiposity, but they really are metabolically healthy. And as a clinician, you wouldn't be as concerned about their health as somebody else who might even be leaner and not as overweight, but be metabolically unhealthy. The looks are deceiving. You could have two people who actually appeared the same, two people just moderately overweight and had some weight to lose. But you could observe them metabolically and see that, oh my gosh, this person metabolically is much more unhealthy than this person, even though they have the same appearance and the same amount of overweight. So it's not something that you can just see. It's not just having excess adiposity. It's having this condition of insulin resistance on top of the excess adiposity. And what it seemed was there was also some genetic predisposition to this. So in South Asian populations, in Latin American populations, in the Pima Indians, there were groups who were much more susceptible to this than others. And even though they looked relatively similar to other people carrying a little excess weight, they were metabolically in trouble, getting type 2 diabetes, having heart attacks. And so what was the cause of the insulin resistance? And this is definitely where Robert Lustig's work came in. He started tracking down glucose and fructose and sugar levels and what was happening. Over this time when this was being discovered, at least in the US and many other parts of the world, sugar intake was increasing. And I want to specifically call this added sugars. So if you were eating fruit, you would get natural sugars. If you were eating vegetables, there's even natural sugars. Vegetables come with fiber in them and they're part of cells, and it takes some time to access the sugar there. But if you have table sugar, maltose, dextrose, or concentrated fruit juice syrup, there's like 20 different names of the types of sugars that people add to some of the foods out there. Basically, they're all fructose and glucose. What seemed to be happening was that Americans were eating more of this, and as simple sugars, they get absorbed very rapidly in the body. And so when that happens, the idea was that the body's sensing, oh my God, you've eaten even more food than you really have. If you have that much glucose, there must be a lot more coming. We're going to need a lot of insulin to handle this. Body started overproducing insulin, and there was so much sugar to put away. The signal wasn't being listened to by your body. This constant influx of glucose spikes and insulin spikes kind of tired out your pancreas and tired out your body. You know, the idea was to help clinicians recognize that, okay, there is a group of people with high LDL. You can prescribe this drug and help them, but that drug isn't going to help the metabolically unhealthy people. And, we've watched as the rates of obesity and overweight have increased, the rates of type 2 diabetes have increased right behind them. People with type 2 diabetes are at an elevated risk of cardiovascular disease. So both of those have been rising. And so people like Robert Lustig and Jerry Reven and many others have been noticing that a lot of this is related to diet. It could be controlled. If we were eating differently, we wouldn't be suffering from these diseases. And that's where the whole sugar, refined carbohydrate issue has come up for health professionals. Interestingly, the timing happened to be such that a lot of the health community was focused on low-fat diets. And how do you lower the fat? You take some of the store products and you take the fat out, and they don't taste as good. And so they added sugar or they added refined grain to those products, which actually taste pretty good, to be perfectly fair, but have not been good for you, have exacerbated this problem. Marketing is very effective. And so if you take whatever the current public health craze is, and on a big package of unhealthy food, you write, oh, low fat, low cholesterol. So, oh, that must be a health food. I think I'll get this cookie or this chip or this dessert. And it's like, no. We really wanted you to have more vegetables and fruits, but they don't have those signs on them. They're in the produce section. They don't have big flashy signs in different colors saying, buy me, that's just eggplant or broccoli or cauliflower. And they don't have added sugar. They are low fat and they are low saturated fat and they are high fiber, but they don't have a sign on them saying that. And so I think the marketers were very clever in recognizing that if they had cookies or chips or desserts, this was a way to sell more of those. So Justin and Erica Sonnenberg and other microbiologists, I think there's three types of studies they've been working on. One was mechanisms with mice. So they would do very controlled studies in a laboratory with mice, a particular type of mouse called gnotobiotic mice, which means these mice have no bacteria in them whatsoever. And they have to be in a germ-free environment. They have to be in a cage, and you can't let them be exposed to any air or anything. And then they control all the bacteria in those mice. And a lot of the work that they did suggested that it was diet that was influencing the health of the microbiome. So one type of studies is with mice. Another type of studies was looking at different areas of the world where there are hunter-gatherer tribes. So these are not a Western diet. This is a lot of gathering roots and tubers and berries and anything edible on the ground and going out hunting and coming back and occasionally having meat, but quite often simply having roots and tubers and beans. And in the process of characterizing their microbiome, you saw it was very different than people with a Western diet. And so the more they looked, like no matter where in the world they were, if it was a hunter-gatherer population, their microbiome was very similar to one another, but very different from anyone with a Western diet. So it could have been the US or Europe or other areas of developed countries. Their microbiomes were also similar to one another, but much less diverse. There were a lot fewer types of microbes in those. And the Hadza for one group in Tanzania is one that they have studied a lot. And there are really thousands of bacterial species that could be in the gut microbiome. They even did some of these studies in mice where they gave them a high fiber and a low fiber diet generation after generation after generation. And what they saw, at least in the mouse studies, was that after every generation, the microbial diversity decreased lower and lower and lower. And then they would try to give them a healthier diet to see if they could get it to grow and be more diverse. And they couldn't. Once these these families, these generations of mice lost their microbial diversity, they couldn't gain it back. So the Sonnenbergs have been very worried that the Western diet is depleting our microbial diversity, and that unless we stop this soon, we might have lost it permanently. And so now the new type of studies that I've been able to work on with them have been with humans, and we get them to eat more fermented foods that have microbes in them and high fiber diets. Fiber is something that we don't have human enzymes to digest and absorb. The very definition of fiber is we don't absorb it and it goes down our intestinal tract to the colon. The microbes actually make 1,000 different enzymes to digest fiber. Humans only have like 20 enzymes for digesting carbohydrate. Collectively, the microbes have many more enzymes for breaking it down. So they are breaking down the fiber, using it as fuel. And what we've learned is that in the process of using that for fuel, they generate small metabolites, very small molecules that we absorb in the body. Sort of the best characterized are short-chain fatty acids. And it looks like these short-chain fatty acids and other metabolites probably help immune function, and they probably help to lower inflammation. So there's a huge amount of enthusiasm for looking at the microbiome diversity and asking how much we could change that. Could we actually help somebody increase their microbial diversity? I know that in the mouse studies, they showed that some of the depletion could not be reversed. But Dr. Sonnenberg has been playing with his own diet for years now, and he personally has doubled his microbial diversity by having, so I'm having kombucha right here. I make a new batch every week, and my wife looks at it and says, oh, there's There's things in it. What's in there? I said, it's the microbes. I'm getting microbes, and I could have kimchi or sauerkraut or yogurt or kefir or pickled vegetables. And so it's very fascinating to see if people can increase their microbial diversity, improve their immune function, and lower inflammation. But I will say those are very challenging topics because there are hundreds of species of microbes. And we've been trying to characterize what are the good ones and what are the bad ones. And it's hard. And then when those microbes are getting fermented food or fiber, it's helping them to generate small molecules that we absorb. And I have one colleague who's been characterizing these, and he's characterized over 100 small molecules that we absorb. And so it's not possible yet to give somebody advice, say, okay, I want you to have broccoli so that this microbe will bloom, so that it will make that small molecule that you will absorb, and it will lower your blood pressure, or it will lower your triglycerides, or it will improve this inflammatory marker. That's the goal, is that someday we might know how to personalize nutrition that way. A lot of companies are working on this right now. Probably, eventually, we will learn how to do that and recognize that someone is missing these microbes and we need to introduce it and we need to feed it with certain fibers. That's the dream, but we're not there yet. We're not even close to saying what that is. So I can tell you, in a study that we recently did, people in general that we recruited were getting 20 grams of fiber a day. And the recommendations in the US are to get 35 or 40. So it was much lower than recommended. And we counseled them and taught them, and we got them to eat 40 grams of fiber a day. And there's another group of people that rarely ate fermented food, like either none or a half a serving a day or a serving every other day. And here we encourage them to eat 6 servings a day. And when I say that, most people think that's too much. They must have just been eating fermented food all day. 6, sir, I only eat 3 meals a day. How can I have fermented food 6 times a day? But you have to understand that a cup of sauerkraut is 2 servings and not many calories. A cup of kimchi is 2 servings and not many calories. If you were to buy a bottle of kombucha in the store, it would be 2 servings, not 1. And in fact, when we put together different combinations of 6 servings of the different foods, on average, the calorie level was about 300 calories for 6 servings. And so for someone who eats 2,000 calories a day, this wasn't everything that they were eating. It wasn't even half. It was like 1/6 or less of their daily intake was these servings of fermented food. That level had a benefit. Would 5 servings? Would 4 servings? Would 3 servings? Would 2 servings have a benefit? That's really hard to test because it would be different for different people. And we didn't test that. We only had 1 dose. So we hope to do other studies with other doses. But another fun thing for us to see was for these people who really almost never had fermented food, that during this study, we got up to 6 servings a day. When this study was over, we said, we'd like to come back later and ask what you're eating, but you're not in the study anymore. So you can eat anything you want. When we went back, the average intake of fermented foods was 3 servings a day after the study was over, which leads me to believe they liked it. After they had done it for the study, they enjoyed some of the fermented foods they were eating, and on their own, they weren't getting 6 servings a day, but they were getting about half that. And so part of that was just a lack of familiarity, which is interesting because for cultures around the world, for thousands of years, fermented foods were quite a normal type of food consumption. With refrigeration and all the way the Western diet has been going, that's just not typical anymore, but it could be. And some of those foods are very fun. And they ruin the yogurt in the US. They add lots of sugar. In my store, there's a whole row of yogurt, and there's plain yogurt here. And then there's raspberry and pineapple and blueberry and guava. And there's pineapple, raspberry, apple, guava. When you look at all those, not only did they add fruit and color, they added sugar to them to sweeten them up. And yes, they have microbes in them, but they have so much added sugar that that probably negates any benefit that the yogurt and the bacteria would have. So if anybody is out there choosing yogurt to get their microbes, I strongly recommend plain, just plain yogurt. If you want fruit in it, go buy some fruit and put it on top. So the two things that I think everyone agrees on are added sugar and refined grain. So if we take, and in the US in particular, so I think of across the whole world, there's sorghum and teff and oats and barley and wheat. There's many, many types of grains. In the US, about 90% of the grain consumption is all wheat. And then of that wheat, most of it is white flour wheat. And there's a reason for that. So if you do take out the germ and take some of the fiber away, the shelf life is very stable. So you can make a very inexpensive food that's accessible to everyone. It doesn't go bad and you don't have to throw it away, but it doesn't have a lot of nutrients in it. You took a lot of the nutrients out. It's mostly starch, which is just glucose. And when you absorb that and digest it, you're just getting a lot of glucose in the end by the time you absorb it all. And if it's not wrapped up in the whole grain, if it's already been ground into a powder to make bread out of, there isn't much digestion for you to do. And so it's digested and absorbed very quickly. This is actually one of my personal interests right now with a lot of people pushing a ketogenic diet, which is not only, it's very low carb. And the only way to get that low is get rid of all your added sugars, all your refined grains, and all your beans, and all your fruits, and all grains, no matter how they come, and only eat above ground vegetables. That's the only carbohydrates you get. I'm a little concerned because the beans and the whole grains and the fruits really have a lot of nutrients in them. And the biggest problem is clearly the added sugar and refined grain. For those people with prediabetes or diabetes, I think the simpler thing to do that would give them more variety in their diet would be to focus on the added sugar and the refined grain, which is usually pretty easy to see on the label that they've added sugar to it or that it's not a whole grain product. And so if they would just focus on that, I think that would be 90% of the benefit. There's more benefit from excluding other foods, maybe, but I think there's some potential harm because all those beans and whole grains and fruits also come with fiber for feeding the microbiome. And if you're eliminating all of those sources of carbohydrate, you're not getting fiber for the microbiome, and a little worried that your internal microbiome. So one of the sources it has for fuel, if you're not eating fiber, is that the mucus lining of our colon is made of carbohydrate-like substances. And so they can eat you. They can be eating the lining of your gut when they're not getting enough fiber. Again, this is something the Sonnenbergs have studied. If they gave them a healthy diet versus a Western diet, they saw that the mucus lining in the mice was getting thinner and thinner and thinner and thinner, exposing them to components of the GI tract, the gastrointestinal tract, going through the lining that should be protecting you, causing inflammation, leaky gut syndrome. And so you really want a thick protective layer of mucus. So you want to be eating fiber so that the microbes eat that and they don't eat you. Oh, yes. Certainly nutrition professionals all think if you made a change in your diet and kept that change, it would have a long-term benefit for you. One of the challenging things in this field, though, is that the food industry makes cheap, inexpensive, very tasty food very accessible, and it's hard to resist. It's inexpensive. It tastes good. It's got salt, sugar, and saturated fat in it. And it's in a nice package and it's easy to buy and you get immediate rewards. So we have dopamine receptors in the brain that are pleasure centers. And some of these things that we're eating make those pleasure centers, it tastes so good. Oh my God, it tastes so good. But it's not healthy for us. It's making us addicted to these foods. The things you eat are sending messages to the brain, and it's not working well for us right now. David Kessler wrote a book called The End of Overeating, and Michael Moss wrote a book called Salt, Sugar, Fat, and they talk about the addictive nature of sugar and refined grains and this brain-gut axis where the brain is listening to your body sensing that sugar. It's actually not hungry, but it keeps eating. And so you eat more calories than you need because you're not getting this sense of satiety. Oh, I'm full. I've had enough. I have enough energy to meet all my needs now. No, it's not getting that message. And so we're overeating, we're gaining weight. And the people who study this, from my impression, is what they say is at that point, it's not so much that people are being gluttonous or weak-willed or just don't have enough control over their body. What's happening is to get a normal sense of satiety or pleasure, they have to eat more and more and more. Kind of like insulin resistance. They're sort of satiety resistant. You should feel full, but you don't. And in order to feel full, you're eating more than you actually need because there's some disconnect with your brain for how much food you need to be full. And it's obviously a problem because of the rate of weight gain, excess weight, excess adiposity. So there are people with celiac disease that really have an intestinal problem with this, and they get very sick if they have any gluten, which is a type of protein that's almost uniquely found in wheat. There's a little bit in some other grains, but it's almost entirely in wheat. So the people who have celiac disease, the only cure for that is to completely avoid wheat. But you could have oats and you could have barley and you could have other foods. There's a lot of grains that you could eat, but not wheat. And then aside from having a full-on diagnosis of celiac disease, there are also people who have a gluten intolerance where it's not a disease condition, but there is an adverse reaction to eating wheat. And we're seeing a rise in this in gluten intolerance, and a lot more people are saying they're gluten intolerant, feeling uncomfortable. There's a huge rise in the number of gluten-free products, which you just mentioned. Not only is that partly due to all the wheat we're eating, but another thing the US has done, I think poorly, is for the sake of low cost and efficiency, whereas there used to be many different types of wheat, varieties of wheat, now they pretty much just grow one or two in all the bread that gets made. And it's almost the same in some other things. There's actually lots of different kinds of bananas to be produced. And they decided that Cavendish bananas grow the best and they're the cheapest. So they only make one kind. And there's so many kinds of rice out there, but making a couple kinds of white rice is what everybody likes. And actually that puts us at risk in terms of different pests that arise. So it could be a fungus or a bug or a weed or something that affects that crop. And if there had been 12 varieties, it usually would only affect one of the 12. But if there's only one variety that you're growing, there's actually sort of a national food security issue here that you could wipe out a whole crop because instead of having a diverse supply of food, you've really focused only on one kind of wheat, one kind of banana, one kind of rice. So it puts us at risk. And I have a feeling that it's because we've narrowed down the varieties of wheat to the most popular selling, inexpensive, cost-effective type that we're eating so much more of that we're developing gluten intolerance. That if there had been more variety of the types of grains, we wouldn't see these growing rates of gluten intolerance as much. And again, part of it's a good reason. Part of it is they're trying to make the food cost less and be more available. So there is a good reason to make food that way. But what we're seeing, I think, are unintended consequences that this gluten intolerance and other health issues are coming about because of these efforts we've made to have inexpensive, accessible food all the time. Yeah, and the answer is no. So probably between the two studies that you mentioned, one is called the A to Z study and one is called Diet Fits. Really, our overall conclusion was that On any diet, some people lose weight. And on every diet, some people fail. There isn't one diet that works for everyone. We've been looking for personal differences where we could personalize the diet and say, oh, you should be low carb and you should be low fat. But what happened in our studies was when we focused on making a very high quality low carbohydrate diet and a high quality low fat diet, they were equal. And part of the way we made them high quality was we had people on both diets eat less added sugar and refined grain. Now, for low fat, that might seem a little odd because added sugar and refined grain don't have fat in them. They are low fat products, but they're not healthy sources of food. And for low carbohydrate diet, those people end up, because they're eating low carb, they eat more fat. That could be high saturated fat. It could be butter and meat, but it could also be high fat because of avocados and fatty fish and nuts and seeds and olive oil on Mediterranean salads. If you made it a healthy low carb with healthy unsaturated fat, and if you made it a healthy low fat without the added sugar and refined grain, the differences between them tend to go away. And so it tends to be that both of them would be fine. It's kind of a good message because maybe you enjoy one type more than the other, but neither of them seems to be the best way compared to the other one, as long as they're both good quality diets and you're focusing on good quality food choices. When we did this in both groups, they were both asked to eat vegetables every day. So vegetables are carbs, but we asked the low carb folks to eat vegetables because it's not a lot of carbohydrates. If you have a salad of vegetables, it is mostly carbohydrates, but there's not many carbs in them. Kind of like I was pointing out earlier that the kimchi and the sauerkraut, a serving is only half a cup and 2 servings is a cup, but it's only like 50 calories. If you were to have a cup of nuts, oh my gosh, that would be hundreds and hundreds of calories. If you were to have an avocado, if you were to fill a cup with avocado, oh my gosh, that would be a lot of calories. But if everybody's having vegetables, even the low carb folks, even though those are mostly carbohydrates, vegetables are mostly carbohydrates, they're not very many calories. But the low carbers eating vegetables every day, even though that's carbs, and the low fatters avoiding added sugar and refined grain, even though those are low fat. So we tried not to focus just on low. We tried to focus on low carb and low fat, but high quality. And when we do that, both of them seem to be okay to help with weight loss. I think what happens there is for certain people, when they eliminate a certain set of foods, they are satisfied, they're satiated, they like the foods, and they have found a way that works for them. And they get on social media and say, I have the answer. This is the answer. And when other people try it, it doesn't work for them. And that's because they had different preferences, cultural differences, or other reasons. There's lots of different things that work. There isn't one way. But because of social media these days, when someone is successful, I feel like they write about it as this is the way. This is the one way, do my way. And somebody else tries it and it doesn't work, but they try another way and it works for them. And they say, oh, this is my way, do it my way. And it doesn't work for everyone. And then when the public sees this, I think their impression is, they all disagree. It's very controversial. There's no agreement whatsoever. Nobody knows anything. Well, I don't think that's true. I think we really know a lot about a healthy diet. And if you get a team of research scientists or nutritionists, well-educated nutritionists in the same room, I think they agree about almost everything. So I got to be on some panels of the American Heart Association, and I've done that with the American Diabetes Association, and I'm now doing it with the Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee. And when they're all well-trained professionals, they can see that this controversy isn't really there. If you understand the context and the foods that people are actually eating, at the end of the day, this comes down to eat healthy foods, eat a lot of vegetables, eat whole foods. You can eat Indian, Middle Eastern, Latin American. There are so many Asian. There's so many different diet types that are tasty and have survived for thousands of years. People try to game the system and say, oh, I'm going to take this and make it a Western diet, and I'm going to add sugar and saturated fat, and it'll be more convenient, and it'll cost less, and it'll taste great. And they ruined it. And so if we could just get back to whole foods, a variety, and less added sugar and less refined grain, you could be Mediterranean, Latin American, Asian, Middle Eastern, and enjoy your food and enjoy your health. One way to approach this is to tell people what to avoid, and another way to approach it is what to include. I think telling people what to avoid often backfires because they avoid it and then they pick another thing that's bad for them. If you just had to boil it down to a simple message, it would be more fiber. If you eat more fiber, that had to come from plants. There's no meats, no dairy, no cheese has any fiber whatsoever. And the fiber has complex carbohydrates that are absorbed slowly in the gut. So it wouldn't necessarily be a low carb diet, but it would be a low amount of fast absorbed glucose. And so you wouldn't have that insulin response. You wouldn't get insulin resistance from eating high fiber foods. And they got plenty of nutrients in them. Getting rid of all the added sugar and refined grain totally works for me. I replaced that with beans and vegetables and nuts and seeds. But I think somebody else is going to say, yes, I got rid of all that added sugar and refined grain. And instead, I'm having artificial sweeteners and I'm having cookies that are keto and I'm having No. What we really meant was for you to have whole foods after you got rid of the added sugar and refined grain. So I would totally agree that those are probably the two most important things to focus on in terms of avoiding. But since people don't like to be told what not to eat, if you tell them to get as much fiber as humanly possible, that means they're including beans, legumes, fruit, nuts, all those things. And then, okay, now have your cake or your cookie. Oh, no, I'm too full. Oh, I had all that other food and I'm so full that I don't think I can even eat the cookie. That's my dream, is that we will focus more on fabulous tasting cultural diets like the ones I've been mentioning the last few minutes, and getting more fiber for the microbiome, which we now understand how important that is, and that will get people to make positive changes of what to include in their diet and not shame them and tell them to avoid that. Oh, you're a shameful person. You included that. You need to avoid it. That's not a very positive message. So if we could focus on the positive message, I think we have the possibility of making a bigger impact. Fasting is hard to study because there's so many different ways to do it. So we don't have a lot of good studies. It's you could do 2 days a week out of 7. You could do 5 days a week out of the month. You could do what's called time restricted eating. Instead of eating over 16 hours, you could eat over 12 or 10 or an 8-hour window. My frustration with a lot of the time restricted eating is they don't talk about the quality of food. They only talk about the window. And I think people say, oh, this is easy. Let's see. Do I eat now? No, it's this time I don't. Do I eat now? Yes, this time I do. So they like how simple that rule is. But I think a lot of them make poor choices for the quality of the food. And I think long-term, the quality is going to matter the most. I haven't seen a lot of good studies to say, that's it. Intermittent fasting. That's the one thing that works for everybody. It hasn't so far in the studies that have been done.
Don't hesitate to pass on the knowledge and hit the subscribe button on our channel for more practical health insights.